Hello, Realtors. Byron King, South Carolina Association Realtors legal team here. We've got a special guest, an expert on flood. Just a reminder, we'll have the legal conference at Wild Dunes on Isle of Palms next month, September 16th, 17th, and 18th. Board of directors on the 16th, legal presentations on the 17th, and then some continuing ed on the 18th with Diana Brothers' new buyer pro course, Austin Smallwood's forms continuing ed, and Adorna Carroll's CRB, building your business continuing education. Lisa's been a good friend to SCR, has done several webinars for us. I'm going to read her bio because it's very impressive, but just kind of a shorthand. She's an expert on flood issues and flood insurance in the Carolinas. She works for NAR, but I'm going to read. She's got a very impressive resume, so I'm going to read that. So Lisa is a seasoned expert in flood management insurance with over 40 years of direct experience with the National Flood Insurance Program, better known as NFIP in acronym talk. Her extensive career encompasses a wide range of specialties, including floodplain mapping, mitigation, floodplain management, flood response, claims processing, and most importantly for realtors, flood insurance. Throughout her career, Lisa has demonstrated a strong commitment to advancing floodplain management practices. She has served as the chair of the Association of State Floodplain Managers, ASFPM, and has been an active member of the Community Rating Task Force, contributing to the development of policies that enhance community resilience to flooding. Currently, Lisa is a member of the Independent Insurance Agents and Brokers of America National Flood Insurance Committee and serves as the alternate to the chair of the Flood Insurance Producers National Association. Her leadership extends to her recent 12-year tenure as regent for the Certified Floodplain Manager program, where she played a pivotal role in promoting professional standards in floodplain management. Lisa holds dual credentials as a certified floodplain manager and an associate in national flood insurance, reflecting her dedication to ongoing education and professional development in the field. She's got those credentials. As owner of Choice Flood Insurance, LLC, and Carolina Flood Solutions, doing business as U.S. Flood Solutions, LLC, she provides essential services to clients navigating the complexities of flood insurance and risk management. And then in summary, with her vast knowledge and experience, Lisa is a sought-after speaker and consultant dedicated to helping communities better prepare for and respond to flood-related challenges. So realtors, if you have any flood issues with any of your transactions, Lisa's in the Carolinas, North Carolina, South Carolina. She knows both well. And we refer, and she's done many webinars for us in the past and works with NAR. Lisa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Byron, for that. I'm also NAR's go-to person for flood insurance. I work with a lot with your government affairs people in DC. So been around realtors and the business for a long time. But let's get started today. I'm going to share my screen here. Just a minute to get the presentation loaded here. It jumped ahead for me. We're going to talk today about the how to prepare for hurricane season. You know, hurricane season started June 1st. A lot of people aren't ready for that, yet because they think, the end of August, September, the end of September is really when we have prime season. That is true. We do need to take steps now to be prepared. We're going to kind of go through the gamut of things today. And we're also going to talk about, how to market flood damage home, because after Helene and, some of the storms we had last year that were not named or remnants of storms, we had a lot of flood damage in the Carolinas. So you got to understand hurricanes and its impact. You have a lot of wind. That hurricane season starts June 1st. Sometimes it starts before, but the official window is June 1 through September 30th. We've had storms on either side of that window. We have an average of 12 named storms every year, and that's been fluctuating since 90s when they really started doing the forecasting, the spaghetti models and things like that. But it's really important for homeowners and realtors to be prepared because, some of these properties that you have on your listings are not owner occupied at this point because they're on the market. And you want to, be able to tell your clients what they need to do to prepare for this next event as it's coming. first off, you have to know your risk. You have to know what a flood is. We've got, where do floods come from? Floods can come from storm surge. We've had a lot of lunar high tides. Myrtle Beach area is very familiar with that. In the low-lying coastal areas, you got stormwater runoff. Neighbors with above ground swimming pools. People don't think about needing flood insurance if their neighbor has an above ground swimming pool, but if that pool accidentally collapses, that is a flood and will not be covered by your homeowner's insurance. Aging infrastructure. We have a lot of older, water mains. Those mains break and that creates flooding. FEMA map flood zones is where you can go to find out if you're in a flood hazard area, mapped by FEMA. It's not going to map the, neighbors above ground swimming pool. It's not going to map the water main breaks. It's only going to look at surface water, but not surface water runoff associated with development. It will map storm surge and flash flooding to some degree. But you need to think about, is there any new land disturbing activity nearby? There's a group in South Carolina around Horry County rises that, they're dealing with, the impacts of the development, the new developments are causing because of fill being brought in. And then, do you live near or behind a dam or levee? And those are all things that you need to think about. But a lot of people say it'll never flood here. Mandatory purchase is, the one thing you need to know about. If the property is in any zone, any flood zone that begins with an A or a V, the lender's going to require federally backed flood insurance to secure that property. They'll at least require building coverage. They will not require contents coverage. Although I have seen now some of the lenders for condominiums, for condominium policy, are requiring contents coverage for property owned by the condominium, such as office furniture, lobby furniture, things like that. That's a new twist we've seen this year. But they're going to cover the amount of the loan. They're not going to cover any equity in the structure. So a lot of people say, well, my lender's only requiring me to have $90,000 worth of coverage. Well, if they're only requiring you to have $90,000 worth of coverage and your structure is worth $200,000 replacement costs, that means you're going to self-insure for for $110,000. A lot of people don't understand that concept. But if they're putting a down payment, they need to be fully insured. They have any equity in the house, they need to be fully insured. Homeowners' best practices, for success is check the property tax records for building value at this point. After the last storms, especially in Florida, a lot of the local governments went in and lowered the property tax values because the structures were damaged. Well, think, well, that's great, because the tax values are low and things like that. But they use that tax value in the aftermath of a storm to determine whether or not a structure has been substantially or damaged or substantially improved. So it's really important that you know where your starting point is at the beginning of hurricane season. If it's incorrect, you're prepared to be able to argue that in the aftermath of the event. So those are things you can do right now. And then the second thing you need to do is communicate changes with your agent. For example, have you added on to the structure? Did you do a big remodel where they might need to increase the replacement cost value of the structure? Did you add another story on? Did you tear the house down? I mean, there's a lot of things that happen. Did you get married? Did you get divorced? All those things need to happen now before the event, because in the case if you got divorced, if both the husband and the wife were listed on the policy, that claim payment check is going to be made payable to the husband and the ex, or the wife and the ex. And so you got to get those names taken care of now, so that in the aftermath of a storm, you've got a claim check with two names on it and only one of them's entitled to the payment. So those things are easy to get resolved. In this time, the other situation could be a spouse passing away. Their name's on the policy, and unless their name's not there anymore, we have to have a copy of the death certificate and we can put it in the name of the primary insured. So we just have to have a copy documentation to move forward. But the biggest thing is that photos, photos, photos. It surprises me how, in the aftermath of a claim, and this is particularly important for realtors because you're listing properties that have just absolutely been remodeled so they can get on the market. They've been painted, they've had updates done, they've, spent a lot, in some cases, spent a lot of money. So if you can, as a realtor, provide them, the new owner, the listing photographs that you had at the time they bought the house, that's going to help them with the claims process because it tells the adjuster what the condition was of the property at the time of purchase. And they've got to keep receipts. Homeowners have to keep receipts. So what we're seeing now is we have, say for Helene, the seller sold the house, the buyer bought the house, there were repairs they said they made. But now when they flood again, the adjuster is going to ask, well, show me that the repairs were made. I need this. I need the receipts. Well, you didn't own the house at the time the repairs were made, so you don't have the receipts. So there needs to be some, if there was a flooding event, there needs to be some disclosure, not whether or not those repairs were made, to the seller. So the seller knows what they're going into. Like I have one client, the adjuster went out there and he says, well, she didn't replace the refrigerator because the serial number is the same. Well, the refrigerator was still working, so she didn't replace it. She wasn't claiming it. But they go back and they look. She had just completed a remodel on the kitchen, and it was, still in process. The cabinets had been installed. All that had been done. The only thing that had not been done was the CO because the storm hit the day before the CO was supposed to be issued. And she had to prove, that she had made the repairs when they got flooded again. This was her third flood. So the first one, she was working on it. She made, didn't have a CO from that one because the repairs were still ongoing, or the, renovation was still ongoing. Got flood damaged, put it back just the way it was. And the adjuster couldn't tell the difference in the photographs. So she had to provide receipts where she had paid to have that work redone. So it's just really important to keep receipts. A lot of people, I'll never need that receipt, again, but it's really important just to keep those receipts. Realtor landmines on the declarations page. This is really critical. FEMA did this thing in 2021, where they've got this, risk rating 2.0, or the new rating methodology as they now call it. When we deal with properties that have a flood history, it stays with you. Your repetitive, if your policy begins with RL, that means it's a repetitive loss policy. But the new declarations page is only going to show claims for the property in the since April 1st of 2021. So when you look at the declarations page, if you look over here where it says on the left-hand side where it says prior NFIP claims, it's going to say 0 unless they've had a claim after 2021, April 1st, 2021. And so it's just really critical that you pay attention to this, because if not, you could end up representing a property saying it has 0 claims when it actually has 4. If it has RL in front of the policy number, it is a repetitive loss property. So you just want to be really careful about, how you represent this NFIP prior claims if you're presenting the seller's declaration page to the there's a way to get that claims history. The homeowner has to file, the building owner has to file with FEMA to get that claims history. And I'm happy to share that information with you. There's a form that has to be filled out and mailed into FEMA. It has to be notarized. They will only share it with the building owner. They will not share it with the buyer. So if you're getting ready to list a property that has RL in front of it for the policy number, then you want to make sure that you have that claims history to present to future buyers. Of course, on the deck page, we now have first floor height, the flood zone, how the first floor height was determined. This one was an elevation certificate. Maximum amount of coverage we can get for an NFIP policy is $250,000, $100,000 for contents, various deductibles. Here's how your building premiums are calculated here on the right hand side. And under this total amount premium here, it'll say where it says 736. If there's no balance due, it will say zero balance due written out on the bottom of the declarations page. So the preparations to do now, this is a really easy app. I'm not promoting any app in particular, but this is one uses AI, and that's probably the most one I found that's the most intuitive. For example, if you just take your camera on your phone and use this app, it'll give you an inventory, everything like you see here on the right. You can name the room that it was in. You can, it'll tell you what it is, the category. You can go over here and you can edit the value of what you paid for it, when you bought it, and the description of what it is. So maybe it's a brand name grand black, instead of just a generic black grand piano, maybe it's a Fenway, so something that you can you want to tell who the manufacturer is. You can go in and edit those things. But this is a great tool to kind of give you a snapshot of what's in your house, and you've got photographs, and so this can be downloaded and handed over to the adjuster at the time of claims. One of the biggest problems we have with contents claims is after the event, you're sorting through and you're like, well, this is just too exhausting because I don't have a good inventory. But this makes it easy for you now. So use this app or one like it and try it. Risk communications. We talk about flood risk all the time to our clients. First thing that happens when they pay off the mortgage, they call up and say, I want to cancel my flood insurance. Well, I have to ask them, what about your flood risk has changed because you paid off your mortgage? They don't understand that the fact that they are self-insuring after an event. The water's never going to get this high. Flood insurance won't pay for anything. Seeing more potential for home buyers, researching flood risk. They want to know about that risk. So buyers are interested. Homeowners, not so much. They like, well, this is something else I have to pay. I was mandated to have it, but I don't really understand why I need it. And that needs to be a paradigm shift in their mentality. There needs to be something that happens to make them understand the risk other than having a flood. Disaster assistance is not going to make them whole. And again, it's only going to exacerbate the problem. So again, they need to look at having flood insurance. Preparing for hurricane season, you got to have create an emergency plan. If you've got buyers, give them a copy of the hurricane evacuation map in their closing packet. Put in some of those things in there. Where are the shelters closest to them? Maybe a little disaster preparedness kit. Stockpiling supplies, maybe a flashlight, batteries, things like that, little first aid kit. But those are the things that we need to have. So, create an emergency plan, stockpile your supplies, and they need to understand the evacuation routes and just how long it takes to evacuate. You can't decide that 15 minutes before the storm hits, that's when you're going to leave. The roads are closed at that point. So it's really important that we move forward with trying to educate a lot of people who are coming here from out of state that just have no background with flood insurance, or excuse me, with hurricanes and evacuation. So when you're looking at your flood insurance policies, you want to, evaluate them to see, do you have enough coverage? Think about inflation. If you have $250,000 for the last 10 years, do you think that inflation factor is going to be covered in your policy? Not hardly at all. So you can either look at getting a private flood policy or purchasing an excess policy. If you have a policy that is on the glide path of receiving a substantial statutory discount, I would get an excess policy until you reach such point that the either private or would be cheaper. Do you need to add or decrease coverage? That's another option. Condo unit owners policies. A lot of people don't understand if they have a condo unit owners policy that there's a provision in the condo unit owners policy that if you have an assessment for, let's say, their condo was damaged and they didn't have enough flood insurance. And they're assessing you $18,000 to repair flood damage to the building. A condo unit owner's coverage with building coverage on it is going to pay that $18,000. It's not going to pay anything above what the condo max would pay for the condo flood insurance policy. But if they were underinsured or had a co-insurance penalty, it will supplement you so you don't have to come out of pocket. Review deductibles you need to make any changes. Did you, like I said, did you have other buildings on site that maybe a guest house or a pool house that you just built that you want to insure, or you probably should insure now? Any upgrades? Do you know how to file a claim? Who do I call? Add those contacts, those numbers to your contacts in your phone now, so that you're not having to, look for a piece of paper later. We're trying to find it on a Google search. Appurtenant structures are structures that are separate from the main dwelling. If it's an attached garage and it's only used as an attached or detached garage, on the property, then 10% of the building coverage that you have on your main policy can apply to that detached garage. But if it has any other use, let's say it has a workshop in there or an office or a bedroom, it's a rental additional dwelling unit, or if it has a 2-story unit and it's got an office upstairs, it has to have its own insurance policy. It's only available for strictly a detached garage at the same location. Use of that 10% is at the discretion of the homeowner, but like this shed down here, that would have to have its own policy. Policy cap limits. This is really important when you're trying to decide, we have a lot of people who are on a fixed income that, they think that, there's a little bit of difference between the NFIP and private. We had a gentleman call us that was on a fixed income, retired. The NFIP policy was about $400 more expensive, but he'd already been through where he had a private policy. And from one year to the next, they increased that premium 400%. So he didn't want to go through that again. So he decided to get an NFIP policy so that it was limited to 18% a year. That's the increase. It's a fixed increase set by Congress. Think about the NFIP as their board of directors is Congress, and Congress tells them how to run the business. So the limit increases applies to individual premium and includes the reserve fund fee. It does not include the HFIA surcharge, which is the $250 or $25 for primary residence, or the federal policy fee. 25% increase applies to businesses, rental properties, severe repetitive loss properties, those properties that have been substantially improved or substantially damaged and not mitigated. FEMA on floodsmart.gov has got a calculator. You can determine the amount of flood damage that occurs. 12 inches of water is going to estimate about $72,000 worth of damage. We're going, yeah, right. Well, there's a driving factor behind this. It gets expensive. So when you go through the claims process, you got a couple things you got to understand. FEMA does not hire adjusters. Adjusting firms do. FEMA nor the insurance carrier is going to hire a contractor for you to either dry or repair your house. And adjusters and insurance agents should provide superior customer service to you during this claims process, not just the adjuster. This is an Xactimate drawing. This is what happens when you get your detail or your flood insurance claim. You're going to look at this and you're going to say, okay, the square footage is right, ceilings, floorings, all that's right, but there's a unit cost here. These unit costs, particularly for wood products, is going to be lower than what you can get in the market because of inflation. So if you can't fix something for that unit cost, then you're going to have to go back to the adjuster and say, with your contractor's estimate or paid receipts, and say, this is what my contractor had to pay for this item. So no longer, I couldn't buy it for that. I couldn't buy that light fixture for $114.89. It cost me $189. And they will pay you the difference. So don't think that when you get that first check that that's all you're going to get. Loss avoidance claims. This is a really easy thing for you to get paid for. From September 2014, 2024, 10 years, there have only been 2,300 claims for products for loss avoidance. Your policy covers $1,000 for loss avoidance. It covers, it's no deductible, does not count as a claim. It'll pay for water pumps, plastic sheeting, sandbags, filled to create temporary levees, labor, moving and storage expenses. But it has to be done at the time that there's been a declaration of flood is imminent threat. That's the only time it's going to pay. So you have to have that sense of urgency that I've got to do something now or I'm going to lose. There's going to be a loss. So when you have that sense of imminent threat, it's declared, maybe it's the governor declares, everybody get ready, we're going to have the storm hit. They start putting up watches, hurricane watches, warnings. There are products you can order and have delivered before the storm. This one here is called a Damn Easy, and that's my daughter's door down in Mount Pleasant. She has hurricane shield, for wind for the door, but she's in a low-lying area in Mount Pleasant, just outside of the flood hazard area, and we bought those for her to put on her doors. It does work. They're pressure sensitive. It's like a baby gate. Pressure sensitive seals against the walls, and it prevents the water from getting in. Drying and cleaning. People say flood insurance policy isn't going to cover anything. It covers drying and cleaning. Drying and cleaning that enclosure down below or that garage can be $60,000 to $70,000 because you've got to get someone in there to disinfect. You got to get fans, dehumidifiers. You got to demo certain drywall or anything that's in there that shouldn't be in there. You got to get air handlers in there. There are 3 ways to get this done. This is the most expensive lesson people learn in the event of a flood. 1, flood policy doesn't cover mold. So if there's moisture, you got to get the air to it, get it air moving, and get the prevent mold from occurring, because that's not going to be covered. Photograph everything before you start moving and separating items or doing demolition, because it's absolutely critical for the adjuster to have photographs. You say, well, I had, this here in the garage, but they can't see where it was sitting when the flood happened. They've got to see that it was a direct physical loss from a flood. But the mitigation contractors that are going to come along after the event, there's 3 ways you're going to get paid by the policy. 1 is a square foot method. You can do that yourself. No professional service. Use HVAC and possibly fans or dehumidifiers that you do yourself. Method 2 is the adjuster determined drying and cleaning charges. Professional services, but no or incomplete drying logs. The cost of drying will be addressed based on the necessary amount of air handler and dehumidifiers rather than per square foot allowance. The third one is how you get paid the most money. These drying contractors, they're professionals. They have to have drying logs that are maintained 7 days a week. A lot of times we've seen them come in and they say, okay, we're coming up on the weekend. We can save you money by not coming out here on Saturday and Sunday. You don't want them to save money, because if they don't have drying logs for Saturday and Sunday, you're getting paid by method 2. So you've got to have, be reasonable. A lot of these contractors, if they don't perform, they don't have the drying logs, and they're not following that methodology 3, there is a FEMA bulletin on this one, then you shouldn't owe them all the money you owe them, because they're going to say, it's $100,000 or $80,000 or $70,000. We're not paying them as your insurance agent. This contract is between you and the drying company. Have in there that they'll take, you can negotiate with them. They'll take what the insurance company will pay for drying and cleaning. And then, so try and get the estimates to include what, that there's some out for you if they don't perform as they should. But you should be on site to supervise any demolition. I've seen drying contractors, mitigation contractors come in. They're in charge of demo. They're supposed to demo 1 foot of no higher than 1 foot above the drywall, the water line for the drywall, and they have demoed the entire room. And we're not paying for that. So you need to be on site and supervise any demo. The NFIP is only going to pay for a foot or two above the water line in the building. Navigating perceptions. People want to, they're looking for an opportunity. They're navigating, you've got to navigate what their perceptions and ethics. So what are the buyer's perceptions? They're a little skeptical of flood damaged home that need extensive repairs. They're worried about future risk if water came once. Again, what's the claims history on this one? Was there something unique happened, like in Columbia, where you had the 5 dams, fail all at one time? That was a unique situation. So they need to understand, the perceptions and concerns that buyers are going to have and frame them more in a positive light. But you need to be, address their concerns and, explain to them what's happened. Like my daughter called me the other day and she's like, they're looking for a new office, but there's a lot of moisture in the crawl space. And, you need to get a professional to go out there and look at that. What would it take to fix that problem? So you've got also legal and ethical concerns in marketing real estate. You have to navigate that landscape of legal obligations, including disclosure laws pertaining to the flood history. You want to ethically promote flood damage properties and you have that transparency that you've got to provide without compromising your competitive advantage. And that's kind of a balance sometimes. But there's a lot of houses in Florida. If you look at the listings, they have demoed the drywall and you can see the top has drywall, the bottom has studs. And there are a lot of people buying houses that were flooded that were not repaired. Identifying potential markets and buyers. You're looking at investors for those properties who are looking for discounted properties. You want to enable strategic marketing approach and address those concerns and interests and motivations. Social media is a big driver this time. So turning those challenges into opportunities, highlighting restoration efforts, improvements. What is the can they get a permit? You've got to get a permit for these repairs. And so, go down ahead of time, before you market this house and find out what restrictions this house is going to fall into. Is it going to be declared substantially improved where they're going to have to raise the house? Because all that factors into your pricing and the way you have to market the house. Or is it, the community saying it's a tear down? So again, using, understanding what the potential buyer may face as they move forward in repairing a flood damaged home. You want to know all that before you sell the house. Utilizing, like I said, social media. Social media is a big driver, and tech savvy buyers are looking for properties, and there's a way to create a compelling listing so that you can find a potential buyer. Insurance considerations, understanding flood policies, the widely differing flood regarding flood coverage, exclusions, and limits between NFIP and private. Some private policies have additional living expense. Some have pool cleanout, some have debris removal, some have for landscapes and shrubs they'll be able to get. So understanding the flood insurance policy, for them, the consumer, is they need to understand what their options are. Talking to their agent, their insurance agent's a big deal. Communicating flood insurance options to buyers. You need to have an agent that you work with that understands flood insurance. A lot of agents say, yeah, I understand flood insurance. Like I was working with competing with another agent yesterday. She knew flood insurance. She knew it backwards and forwards. And she rated the policy at $10,990. Mine was $4,500. The difference between the two of us is I made a site visit to the property and looked at the property before I presented my quote to the client. And she told the client, that's not a slab on grade building, or she had it written as a slab on grade building. And it's not a slab on grade building because I went and looked at it, but she wrote it as slab on grade. So my client says, well, what, she's saying that you wrote it wrong. I said, I didn't write it wrong. You saw what she did. She put down slab on grade. Do you have a slab? He said, no. Well, I said, then there's your point. But there are a lot of agents who think they know flood insurance, but they sometimes can't do anything other than write the policy. If the agent calls up and they said, do I have flood coverage or am I covered? And the agent says yes. Sometimes the homeowner's thinking, when they're asking that question, am I covered for the enclosure down below? So the agent has to ask more questions, the insurance agent. And so it really having someone to work with who can answer those questions really makes you look good, because when it comes time to navigating claims and repairs, they're the person who's going to work with that agent to make sure they get paid. Like, we have weekly calls with our adjusting firms. We pick our adjusting firms through the carriers, and we have weekly calls to figure out where we're at on every claim. That is it takes us, over an hour, but that's an hour well spent, because then we know how to, whether we're waiting on the client or the insured or the adjuster, and we can figure out what do we need. We kind of nudge them along, see if there's something we can provide to help them. Sometimes it's a communication barrier. They just don't understand the adjuster language and what the adjuster's looking for. But you got to watch out for this claims process. You got to watch out for people coming knocking on your door so they can do a job, take your money, and walk. You never see them again. Keep your receipts. Hire people who are local. If you hire somebody, who's out of state, make sure that they've at least gotten a local business license to do business in their jurisdiction, so that somebody knows, at least has vetted them and knows how to get in touch with them. Get a copy of their driver's license. Community engaging support, building connections and resources. Man, there's a realtor down in Florida. She is all the time going down to the building inspections office after a flood, and she's posting online saying, hey, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're finding, and this is what you can expect when you go in for your permit. This is what's happening now in the reconstruction process. This is what you need to know. Invite your new buyers that you've just closed in the last 6 months to an informal session, so they can talk about preparedness. Have someone come in from emergency management, talk about evacuation. Have some gathering of sorts, or even if it's virtual, online, so that they can, there's a communication there that you can establish a relationship with them. So building those relationships with local governments and those homeowners, and then after the fact, partnering with disaster recovery. South Carolina's got and NER has a great disaster recovery program for realtors, to help other realtors who've been damaged by storms. But you also do a lot of charitable work in the community. So streamlining those efforts and communicating that information out to the homeowners, either online or by text, or however you market yourself, that is a great thing to do. So maintain those communications with clients, providing resources for recovery and rebuilding, and showcasing and testimonials. Those all things inspire trust among potential buyers and illustrate your effectiveness to overcome challenges post-disaster. Because you're going to have people who are coming in town who are coming in looking, well, had already had an appointment scheduled, and they're already there. And so now you're moving forward. So recap a couple of things. Recap a couple things. Just want to say, have a list of essential preparedness tips that you can give your client. Summarize, your marketing strategies. You need to be very concise, especially when you're dealing with flood damage homes. You want to stay focused on the goal that flood damage properties pose to you and the hurricanes, because we live in an area in Eastern Carolinas where we flood a lot. We have a lot of hurricanes. Knock on wood, we've been very lucky this year. We haven't had that. And I encourage you to take proactive measures. Stay vigilant with hurricane preparedness and marketing that hurricane preparedness. Are you ready? Are these the things you've done? Create that culture of resiliency in the real estate community and among the homeowners. And with that, we're going to take questions. My contact information is here. It's Lisa at simplyflood.com, and my telephone number is 803-865-4297.